And when we have a mask on and people can't see our lips and they can't see us talking, if we can project a smile through our eyes and through other facial expressions and through our tone of voice, more often than not, that's going to have a positive effect on the interaction that we're having.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where professionals in the attractions business can get tips, tools, and even a bit of inspiration.
Join us as we tackle some of the most important topics facing the attractions industry today and gain insights from some of the top leaders, creators, and influencers from the exciting world of theme parks, zoos, museums, aquariums, and family entertainment centers.
Because this show is created by Attraction Pros for Attraction Pros. I am Josh Liebman, Director of Business Development for Amusement Advantage. I help attractions understand and improve their guest experience.
And I'm Matt Heller, founder of Performance Optimist Consulting. I help leaders lead and work with attractions to increase employee engagement and retention.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and enjoy the leading resource for attractions industry professionals, the Attraction Pros podcast. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going really well, Josh. How about you?
I'm doing very well. I am very excited to be co-hosting this webinar for Attraction Pros talking about de-escalation techniques to help your employees, your guests, and your business.
I am super excited as well. And we have a special guest with us today, Mr.
Right.
Scot Carson. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited as well. This is a super timely topic and glad to take part today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. In fact, you're going to be sharing some data from some mystery shops conducted by Amusement Advantage as far as what guests are saying on this topic and how comfortable they have felt visiting various attractions throughout the U.S. And hearing what that data shows in terms of guest perceptions and what all of the attendees on this webinar will be able to take away from it. So just some very quick introductions here. Scott, you're the founder and CEO of Amusement Advantage. Matt, as we know, you are the founder of Performance Optimist Consulting, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Amusement Advantage. And just a quick three-part agenda here on what we're going to be covering over the next hour. We're going to start with Scott and learn about what your guests are saying. And then we're going to look at this topic from the standpoint of both proactive de-escalation as well as techniques that can be used from a responsive standpoint. So Matt's going to be covering the proactive component in the interest of minimizing the amount of escalated scenarios that your staff members will need to encounter when working with guests on a daily basis. And then from the responsive standpoint, I'll be talking about a number of complaint resolution topics for when they do come up and what we can do to minimize how escalated they become to be able to resolve the issues in a very timely manner. So with that in mind, Scott, we want to turn it over to you to talk about what your guests are saying through mystery shops.
Great. Well, thanks, Josh. Again, I'm Scot Carson, founder and CEO of Amusement Advantage. And for those who don't know, we provide guest experience measurement analysis services exclusively to the attractions industry. And our flagship service is mystery shopping. And we conduct over 6,000 mystery shops annually at attractions at all types and sizes. So back in April, we surveyed our network of over 60,000 contractors as to their expectations related to COVID-19 concerns when they were going to reopen. And we received over 2,000 responses. And you can view the full results of that survey on our website. But for the purposes of today's webinar, we just want to revisit some of those key findings as they helped formulate some new special COVID-19 concerns questions that were added to our clients' mystery shopping forms. So we worked with each client to add just those questions that matched each individual client's COVID procedures and measurement goals. And we also worked with some clients to create custom questions as needed to measure real unique and specific operational changes at their attractions. So anyway, after implementing these COVID measures questions on mystery shops, we have now compiled data from shops from May 15th through August 15th. So we're going to share that with you this morning. So let's move on to our next slide here. All right, so this slide, as you can see from the data as to consumers' expected modifications related to attractions procedures when opening, reduced capacity was overwhelmingly expected by most consumers. And this has been one of the most common areas of COVID evaluation requested by clients on their reports. Mask wearing expectations were mixed, with more people expecting employees to wear masks certainly than guests to wear masks. So, all right, on this next slide, the word cloud shows the results of free-form responses that consumers had in terms of expected sanitation measures. And hand sanitizer, obviously, being readily available, was clearly indicated as the top expectation by a majority of guests. And other notable comments were related to masks being available and surfaces being cleaned. All right, so that tells us what we saw in terms of expectations. Now let's look at the actual data from shops over this summer. So when we look at these COVID questions, overall shoppers have found that reduced capacity is being enforced by attractions. And this is really great to see, since it was identified as the most important action that attractions could take when reopening to ease their guests' concerns. All right, when we look at the data related to social distancing, attractions are doing much better at enforcing distancing in any type of outside entry or queue line as compared with actual ride or attraction queue lines once inside the attraction. And shoppers felt overall that signage was clear, but we all know signage isn't always enough to direct guest behavior. And in analyzing the narratives related to any negative comments on signage, inconsistent signage was cited along with a lack of signage or employee guidance if an attraction became overcrowded and the line extended beyond the regular queue line or social distancing signage. So that's something we saw in quite a bit of narratives when there was a negative response as to signage. All right, moving on to our next slide, dealing with cleaning and hand sanitizer initiatives at attractions. In terms of cleaning, facilities were rated much higher as to providing sanitizer than actively cleaning. And again, in analyzing the narrative comments provided in any negative responses on sanitizer, the comments focused on sanitizer not being provided enough in actual ride queue lines, attraction queue lines, and then certainly anytime we saw a negative response that was related to a dispenser being empty, that triggered an automatic negative response there. And again, any negative narrative that we saw in terms of cleaning also looked at a lack of consistency, which kind of points to that heightened expectations of guests. They want to see that consistent approach throughout. All right, awesome. Let's move on to employee behavior. So our shoppers found that employees did a great job of maintaining physical distancing and still scored over 90% in terms of wearing masks. And in terms of those shoppers that answered negatively about mask wearing with employees, there were a lot of comments about improper mask wearing, and which for many people that resulted in basically feeling like it's pointless to wear the mask if you're not going to wear it properly. So a lot of comments seen around that. All right, that takes us to our next slide focused on guest behavior. And as for impressions in terms of guests wearing masks, attractions scored just under 90% in terms of enforcement upon entry. And then unfortunately, once they're inside, guest compliance scored a pretty low 58%. So not real surprising based on everything we've seen in the news in the industry as to pushback from guests. Also, there were some interesting comments about improper mask wearing, again, with guests here, similar to what we saw with employees. If it's not worn properly, a lot of guests just view it as you might as well not even wear it. So, All right, and moving on to our last slide here in terms of the data we want to share this morning. Overall, the good news is that despite varying perceptions as to what attractions should do to ease their concerns, shoppers' overall impressions are fairly positive, with 87% agreeing that attractions are doing enough to ease their concerns. And analyzing the narrative comments again for those shoppers that felt attractions aren't doing enough, the most common feedback that we saw was employees aren't enforcing social distancing or mask wearing. In our other chart here, we see some attractions have asked shoppers to rate their impressions on a scale of 0 through 4 in terms of both employee, facility changes, and overall readiness. And these scores were fairly high, but I think it's worth noting that the impressions as to employees doing enough was the lowest of those 3 scores. I also noted that if a shopper had visited more than one attraction, in comparing the two, they seemed to expect more aggressive requirements and enforcement if the attractions weren't doing the same thing. And that's regardless of any local guidelines or jurisdictional guidelines or requirements. So great, well, that wraps up the data I wanted to present. I hope you've gained a new insight as to guest expectations in terms of reopening and what we're seeing. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions at the end of the webinar or after the webinar. And at this point, I will pass the baton off to Matt.
So one quick thing actually that I want to point out or note with that data that I found interesting is that for the majority of those questions, that the response was overwhelmingly positive in terms of guests' perceptions and guests' comfort level. So when we're talking about these instances of certain guests who might be challenging policies or those who might be, questioning or whatnot, that we're really talking about a small subset of most guests that are visiting, but who happen to be probably, making the largest waves or tend to have the loudest voices, right?
Certainly.
Yeah. So we did have actually a question or two that came in that said, should we be verifying guests have masks before entering FECs? And that's a really good question. I think it really comes down to your specific policy tied in with your state or county mandated as far as that. If it is required, then, similarly, so personally, I'm in Chicago, and whenever I go to the grocery store, there's a staff member usually positioned at the entrance of the grocery store that's making sure that, that customers have masks when they're walking in. Some of them do, some of them don't. Others, just make sure that their employees are, more aware of guests wearing masks or not wearing masks and, politely asking them to. So with that, let's turn it over to Matt, who's going to be talking about proactive de-escalation to hopefully minimize the number of escalated scenarios that come up throughout your operation. So Matt, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. And I wanted to reiterate what you were just talking about in terms of the data, because the number of people, like you said, that we're going to have to de-escalate probably isn't all that many, or the intensity of those situations could be out of proportion to the positive things that are happening. But I think that's really why we want to talk about this proactive de-escalation topic, because if there's anything that we can to minimize the chance of this happening, or to even reduce it by 25 or 50%, then absolutely that's going to be something that's great for you, your team members, your organization, your guests. And the other thing I wanted to kind of address with that question about the masks and the FECs, one thing that I've seen at a local store is they do require masks, and they have a box of those kind of cheaper paper surgical type masks that you can get at the drugstore. They've got a pile of those sitting right at the entrance. And if you don't have one, they ask you to put one of those on. So, part of it is if you're going to require, don't have one, then the option is to turn them away, or here's one that we've got for you. You can wear this while you're here. So those are a couple of different ways to kind of look at that. But my section here, again, is on proactive de-escalation. And what does that really mean? Again, really focusing on the things that we can do ahead of time so those nasty situations don't actually happen. And I pulled a quote from a guy named Jack Dempsey, who some of you may know if you're boxing fans. I'm not really a boxing fan, but I've heard his quote before, that the best defense is a good offense, and really positioning ourselves so that we're doing everything in our power as leaders and as organizations to minimize the chance of those nasty situations cropping up, because we know that even though those nasty situations may not happen, every day, all the time, that the impact of those can be felt far and wide. You could really, have a personal reaction to that, or your team could be reacting to that or have an impact. And so we want to make sure that we're reducing the possibility of those in any way that we absolutely can. So the first thing that I really want to talk about is something that's really foundational as we talk about the things that we can do as organizations and as individuals to try to minimize the chance of a nasty interaction, and that is to smile. And I know a lot of people say, well, smiles are hidden behind masks, but this is Nia, and she works in the merchandise department at Lagoon up in Utah. And I think she proves, if you can see the screen, that the left-hand picture, she's absolutely smiling. She's got a mask on, so we can't see her face. But in the right-hand picture, she doesn't look, unapproachable, but you can tell that there's a different expression on her face. And what are some of the other differences that we see when someone smiles? It's not just about the mouth. It is about the eyes. You can see his cheekbones are raised up a little bit. She's got a little tilt to her head. Her shoulders raised up a little bit. I know people that when they smile with their entire body. So don't think that just because we're wearing a mask that you can't see us smile. And so this is something I absolutely encourage us to continue to focus on, is not only, reminding people to smile, but also creating situations where your team members want to smile and they're in a fun environment. And we're going to talk more about some of these things a little bit later. But encouraging people to have a positive attitude and a positive outlook. And again, the benefit of smiling isn't just physical, but if you've been in a situation where you're having a tough day or something like that, and you force yourself to smile, a lot of times that negativity just kind of washes away. We can control how we think and we feel, and so when we smile, it's really hard to be upset when you're smiling. The other part of that has nothing to do with physical either is actually your tone of voice, because I don't know if you can tell right now if you're just listening, but I just put on a big goofy smile, and I can even hear it in my voice that my tone of voice has changed a little bit because I'm smiling. And when we have a mask on and people can't see our lips and they can't see us talking, if we can project a smile through our eyes and through other facial expressions and through our tone of voice, more often than not, that's going to have a positive effect on the interaction that we're having. So again, I don't think we can go out and just demand that people smile. You got to smile, you got to smile. But again, it's partly about creating circumstances and creating an environment where people want to naturally and genuinely smile. And that was true pre-COVID, and it's actually true now, and it's going to be true once we're all through this. So I think a smile is really, really still very important to all of us. And the next thing that I think that kind of goes along with that is how we actually have a conversation with people. And so what I've really been encouraging people to do is start a conversation, not a confrontation. And so often when we are going up to someone and we have to say, okay, put your mask on, or it's got to be over your nose, or, make sure you're socially distancing, that oftentimes that comes across, even if we say it in a nice way, it can come across in a negative way. It can come across in a demanding way. And so one of the things that I learned when I was working at Universal Studios was when you have to present some of that sensitive information to people, it's much more effective to actually just get into a conversation with them and then kind of bring it up. And the situation that we were in at Universal was we had just created the smoking areas where people could, smoke in a certain area. There were benches, there were umbrellas, ashtrays, the whole 9 yards, trying to keep the entire the entire park smoke free. And what we found was that when you go up to someone, you say, you can't smoke here, they can get very defensive. So it's kind of the same thing when you're going up to someone and saying, hey, you have to put your mask on, or please put it up over your nose, whatever the case may be. And so what we started doing was just going up and having a conversation. So I might walk up to somebody at Universal and just start walking with them. If they're smoking in a non-smoking area, I might just say, hey, how you guys doing today? Have you guys been on the Mummy? Oh yeah, that's my favorite. Awesome. Looks like you guys are headed to get some ice cream. Get the chocolate. That's my favorite. By the way, did you know that there's special areas in the park where you can smoke? Now, what did I just do there? I built some rapport. I built a little bit of a relationship. We were actually starting to talk and talk about some positive things. And then I brought up the fact that there are special areas in the park where they can smoke. And so I actually told them what they could do, not what they couldn't do. And that was a big part, I think, that helped turn us around in those kind of conversations, because now we were talking about the positive and not always harping on the negative. And I think the same thing can work with masks. So for example, if you are, at an area, and you saw it in Scott's data that sometimes when people are going into a queue for a ride or something, that we're not as good at reinforcing those mask rules potentially. So when people are coming up to you, you can stop and say, "Hey, you guys having a good time in the park today? That's awesome. That's awesome. Have you guys tried XYZ? Hey, just remember, while you're in the line, make sure your mask's up, right? You're going on the roller coaster, hands up, masks up, right?" There's a fun way you can do it, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But what we're doing, again, is just starting a conversation, not a confrontation. And remember, people are coming to your place to have fun. Not many people, hopefully, are coming to be a jerk and to get into a confrontation. So if we start those conversations off right, chances are they're going to go the way we want them to go and not have to go into the things that Josh is going to talk about from a reactionary standpoint. So we're smiling, we're starting a conversation, not a confrontation. And to me, what this also gets to is equipping your team with the tools that they need to be able to handle these situations. So whether it's, again, reminding them or creating an environment where they are naturally smiling, that's a tool. Right? Having those conversation skills, that's a tool. And I wouldn't say to just tell them about it or give them a piece of paper with it on there. Get them to practice it. What we practice becomes our habits. So make sure that you're practicing those conversations, whether it's a morning meeting or a training session that you set up specifically, but get your team members to practice and feel comfortable with doing all those things that you're now asking them to do. It's one thing to equip them with, the spray bottle and the rag to sanitize the surfaces. That's equipment. Absolutely. Those are tools that people need, but they also need the softer skills. They also need the conversation skills. They need to be able to handle it when somebody says, "Hey, I'm not wearing a mask." And that's when we're going to get to Josh's stuff, right? So teach them the things that Josh is going to talk about as well, because those are things that they really need to know so that they can effectively do their job. And you also saw in Scott's data that one of the things that the shoppers found was that team members weren't necessarily as good at reinforcing some of those things. And it could just be a comfort level, right? It could just be that they're not comfortable, going up to somebody and having that conversation, maybe because the last time they had the conversation, it went horribly wrong. So now they're kind of shying away from it. So when I talk about equipping your team with the tools, it really comes down to three different things. And some of you have heard me talk about these things before. Number one, what do you want your team members to know? So are there regulations they need to know? Are there your policies that they need to know? Are there, new things that are coming out from the CDC every day, it seems like, that your team members need to know? So what is the information they need to be successful? The next part is, how do you want them to feel? Do you want them to feel confident? Then we better put them through the paces and make sure that they feel confident in a safe environment, in a training environment, in a morning meeting before we send them out there. Do you want them to feel like you've got their back? Then you better have their back. Then you better be able to come out and help them out if they ever feel uncomfortable. And we're going to talk more about that here in a little bit. And the last part, of course, is, what do you want them to do? So we've got the know, the feel, and the do. So what actions do you want them to take? Do you want them to remind people to put their masks up? Do you want people to encourage people to physically distance? Well, if that's the case, then what are those things that you need to do to make sure that they're doing those things, that they feel comfortable doing those things? How can you equip your teams so that they can carry out those new procedures that we've never had to do before? So those are the three things that I tend to think about when I talk about equipping your teams with tools: is what do you want them to know? How do you want them to feel? And specifically, what do you want them to do? I think there's also some things that we can organizationally that would really help us set the stage for positivity. And again, this is about proactive de-escalation. So really focusing on, your guests and the guest behavior. And you also saw in Scott's data that, there's fewer guests that aren't doing it than are doing it. So are we rewarding or recognizing the people that are doing it? And I posed this question to somebody a while ago, and they're like, no, I never really thought of that. But, the concept of what gets recognized gets repeated is the same whether they're guests or whether they're team members. So if you've got guests that are already complying with your rules and they're physically distancing and they are wearing their masks and, they're going up to the hand sanitizer and they're washing their hands, well, can't we recognize them for that? What if you challenge your team and say, I want you to thank the first 50 people that you see wearing a mask. And not only does this recognize the behavior in the guests and get them to repeat it and get them to feel good about it, it also feels good to thank people. It also really feels good when you are able to acknowledge and show that you have appreciation for someone else. And so that kind of positivity also spreads, and that helps your team members, again, not feel so defensive when they do have to address one of these particular situations. So what gets rewarded, what gets recognized, absolutely gets repeated. And by the way, you could also recognize them not just by thanking them, but what's to stop you from having some ice cream coupons in your pocket? And when you see a family that's all got their masks on and you can walk up to them and say, hey, thank you so much for wearing your mask today. That really helps keep everybody safe. Here's some ice cream on us. It's not going to cost you much, but guess what it's going to do? It's going to make those guests feel so much better about doing something that they probably don't want to do. But again, that's going to help them be in a better mood and spread the positivity for you along with your team members. So that's a couple things we can do for our guests. Also, speaking of our guests, there are a lot of things that are actually going right. And I think we have the opportunity as leaders to kind of control the narrative. And, sometimes when there's some really intense negative things happening, that's what tends to keep our focus, right? Those are the things that we tend to talk about. Well, this negative thing happened and here's how we're going to deal with it. But there are far more positive things happening, and we can control that narrative. We can control that story by sharing that story. So here, if you're looking at the screen, you can see a couple of great comments that came in from a park that people were actually saying, hey, this was really great. We liked what was going on here. So could you take that information and present it at a morning meeting? Could you take that and blast it out on a text or an email to your team members? Whatever you can do, however you can communicate this, that their actions of asking people to put masks on and social distancing, those actions are actually having a positive impact. You can share that story. And again, think about the thought process, or think about how people are going to feel when they hear every single morning that their actions, even though they can be a pain, those actions are actually having a positive impact. Guess what they're going to want to do even more? Perform those actions. So similarly, it's what gets rewarded or what gets recognized gets repeated. The other thing I would suggest on this one is if you've had someone that has had a great experience, if you had a team member that really had a great experience with a guest, get them to share that. Bring them up at the morning meeting and say, hey, Josh, can you share that experience that you had yesterday? It was really great, a really great story for everybody to hear. Remember, you have the opportunity to shape and share this narrative and this story. And if you can help keep it positive, that helps keep your team positive. And by the way, that helps keep them smiling. So this is one of those things that you can do to kind of help make sure that they feel like they're in an environment that is positive, because we are, amusement parks, and we are zoos, and we're aquariums, and we're places that people are coming to have a good time, or to be educated, or just to get away from things. So, we should be, providing a positive image and a positive story as much as we absolutely can. And with that, I wanted to share a couple of things that people are doing to do just that and find fun ways to deliver the message. So the first one that I wanted to share was from Gatorland down in Orlando, Florida. This is one of the first ones I heard of. They've got a skunk ape social distancing character that will go around the park, and it's got this can of aerosol and a rag, and he's got his mask, and it's this big ape looking thing, and he's got a t-shirt on. And he goes around the park in a very fun way, joking around with the guests, making sure that they're keeping their distance and, wearing their masks and things like that. We are a creative bunch. We are a creative group of people, and we should be able to come up with something more creative than, a sticker on the ground and a sign. Those things have limited impact, but when you see this skunk ape thing coming toward you, yeah, you're going to laugh a bit. It's all in good fun, but he's going to deliver the message in a really fun way. And I challenge you to think about, what are those ways that you can bring in your own intellectual property? What are those ways that you can bring in your characters? How can you, make this unique to your specific facility so that it translates to the guest in a fun way that you're actually, abiding by the rules, not just, oh, you got to abide by the rules. You got to abide by the rules. The other one that I wanted to share that is really, really proactive too was from Canopy Lake Park, and I have to give our friends over at International Ride Training the credit for grabbing this video. This is actually a still picture of the video they took. But up at Canopy Lake Park in New Hampshire, they've got people that will drive around in this coolly painted antique car, and they've got loudspeakers on the back, so they're in a very friendly way reminding people to keep your distance and to wear your mask. And then they've also got this other young lady who's got a backpack full of hand sanitizer. And it's like one of those things, it's an apparatus. I'm not even sure what it's called, but you'll see a lot of landscapers have them, and they're using them to spray the plants and things like that. I'm sure this is a new one, but they've got it full of hand sanitizer. And if you watch their whole video, it's on the International Ride Training Facebook page. If you watch the whole video, you will see this young lady going up to people in ride lines and giving them a squirt of hand sanitizer. People are calling her over to give them hand sanitizer. So what a great way, what a great message to send to people that, hey, we're going to do this. We all know we have to do this, but let's at least do this in a fun way. So those are just a couple of ideas. I'm sure that you guys are also doing some really, really cool things. I would love to hear about those things. If you want to email us at attractionpros@gmail.com, we'd love to hear about those as well. But those are just some fun ideas. And again, I challenge you to think about ways that you can do this a little differently. By the way, get your team members involved. This doesn't have to be something where you're sitting up in your office with a whiteboard or a flip chart and saying, what can we possibly do? Get your team members involved. I'm sure they're going to have some really great examples and really great things that you can do. Now, with all that said, with all the talk of positivity, there's going to be some situations where people are going to need to vent. And I'm talking about staff members. I'm talking about your employees. And I'm stealing something from a good friend of mine who runs a catering business. And she and her family and her crew, they go to a lot of festivals and fairs and, working really intense schedules, just like we do here in the attractions industry. And they've come up with something called the Grumble Station. And this is something they came up with a long time ago, well, not even for COVID. But basically, it's a spot where your team members can go and they've got a little punching bag back there. They've got, a place that's away from the guests. So if you want to just go back there and scream your head off, you can do that. But the point is that you're giving your team members an outlet for this negative energy. And if there's something that is stressful that's going on, if there's something that is, putting people in a negative situation, give them the opportunity to get rid of that energy in a productive and healthy way. I don't know how many out there, I'm sure everybody out there has dealt with a negative situation. Then you have to turn around and deal with someone in a really positive way. Well, that can be hard sometimes. And especially if you're not used to it, especially if you don't know how to kind of flip the switch and get right back into a hospitality type mentality. So giving people the opportunity to go back in the Grumble Station, get out their frustration, focus on, getting rid of that energy, and then come back calm, cool, collected, and then you can actually interact with your guests in a better way. So to me, this is about taking care of the human being as much as you're taking care of the team member. And that leads me into my very last thing that I want to talk a little bit about. And if you're able to see the screen, you can see that there's a picture of a mama bear and some of her cubs. And, a mama bear is really well known for fiercely protecting her cubs. And I think we need to take a very similar stance with our team members, especially right now, because our team members are taking some abuse in some cases. And I really encourage people, if there are guests that are abusive to your team members, I think as leaders, as managers, as business owners, we have to take pretty swift action. Is it true that we're probably wanting every single dollar that's coming through the door at this point? Yes. At the same time, do we also need to protect our team members? Do we also need to show our team members that they truly are our most valuable asset? And if that's the case, then sometimes we have a choice to make. If that guest is being abusive, if they're refusing to follow our rules, then it shouldn't be that we look the other way and just let them go on their day. That person, that family, may have to leave our facility, because that's what it's going to take to really protect our team members. And think about this. If we don't do that, if we allow our guests to bully our team members, if we allow our guests to abuse them in any way, guess what's not going to happen? Your team members are not going to be smiling. Your team members are not going to start a conversation, not a confrontation. Your team members are probably going to be pretty defensive. That's if your team members stay. Your team members could say, you know what? I'm out of here. I do not feel comfortable in this environment. And so whatever mechanism you have with your facility, whether it's a phone number, whether it's a text, whether it's a hand signal. Josh and I were just talking to Ike Kwan from the California Academy of Sciences, and they have a hand signal that if you are interacting with someone and you need assistance, you give a very subtle hand signal and somebody else will see that and come over and assist. So whatever that situation is, whatever that procedure is at your facility, make sure your team members know that. Make sure your team members can practice that and know that you're going to be there to protect them. I think that's a huge part of this proactive de-escalation piece, because we've got to take care of our team members, because they're the ones that are going to be following through with all of our rules and regulations. So thank you very much for listening about the proactive de-escalation. I hope some of these things, some of these ideas will help you in your facility. Like Scott, if you'd like to talk about any of these things, or you want to talk a little bit about how to put these into practice in your facility, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. We'll share the contact information at the end. But thank you very much for being part of this webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to Josh.
Thank you, Matt. That was really interesting. Really appreciated all the examples that you gave there, and particularly, I loved the one you gave from Canopy Lake Park with the hand sanitizer and the antique car, because that really merges. I would say here's the requirement and the restrictions that we have, and then here's the fact that we are an amusement park and our job is to amuse people, and really being able to find the balance of both of those. So I love that, and the tip you gave about the ice cream coupons and being able to reward proactive behavior. Because I think that if there's a family that's walking around a park or an attraction and they are rewarded simply for, following the rules, then they're probably going to make sure that they continue doing that, because they don't want to let you down. If Matt gives you that ice cream coupon for, properly wearing your mask and demonstrating proper physical distancing and all that, then you think, hey, I gotta live up to this, free ice cream I just got, or something like that. So like we said, all the techniques that Matt provided is in the interest of minimizing the likelihood of running into escalated situations with guests who are expressing further frustration and perhaps not being compliant. And just like with any other, guest situation, we want to be as proactive as possible and put as much into place that we can to minimize whether it's service failures or guest complaints or escalated scenarios. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we are prepared for all possible situations, and that in the event that a guest does bring up an issue or does, escalate a situation, then we want to make sure that we've got the appropriate response. And there was an article that I saw a few days ago that was specifically related to the industry, and it made a really good point that the fact that we are enforcing policies that are for safety reasons or safety purposes, that guests will sometimes maybe it won't resonate with them immediately, maybe they will challenge them, is really nothing new in our industry. When we're looking at things like height requirements or a number of ride related safety, or just in general with guest compliance, that we deal with a number of situations regularly where we need to diffuse a situation, hopefully before it escalates, in the interest of safety of guests and team members. So that in and of itself is not specifically new, but some of the challenges that we are dealing with now, of course, are much newer. Prior to COVID, we weren't worried about physical distancing or guests wearing masks. So what I did was I took a very common approach to complaint resolution. And if you've ever seen me speak, whether it's at a conference or, or at a workshop, or I oftentimes talk about this on the podcast, the last model is a very effective approach to a wide variety of types of whether it's service failure or complaint resolution. So when looking at the current situation that we're in right now, took the last model and revised it just a little bit. It was not a complete overhaul, but taking a look at the specific techniques that we use throughout this model are able to be adapted and modified to what it is that we are dealing with and working with today with the variety of challenges that we have. So this is an acronym, and I'll take you through each one of these here. And the first is very much about listening. So that is the L in the last model acronym. Really taking the opportunity to listen to the guest. And it's more than just hearing. It's more than just letting the guest, vent towards you. That's part of it. But it's really demonstrating active listening and really starting up that conversation. So the first is about verifying the guest's concerns. Now, if we talk about that, well, maybe that sounds a little counterintuitive to everything going on right now, but perhaps there is a concern element that is justified, and maybe we feel the same way. So for instance, if we're talking about wearing masks, which is one of the things that many people tend to be challenging right now, or that's coming up a lot in the news and various articles, is that, hey, we kind of agree that wearing a mask is not the most comfortable way to experience an attraction, right? Or to experience anything, or going to the grocery store, or doing just about anything that requires us to wear a mask these days. And of course, we're all looking forward to the day where we don't have to wear masks anymore. But being able to verify that concern and say, yeah, I totally get it. Wearing a mask is uncomfortable. Having to be more proactive about maintaining a physical distance. Yeah, it's a little unnatural to what we're used to doing. And say, hey, I completely agree with the fact that you might not be comfortable. Say, hey, we're feeling a little uncomfortable as well, not with the policy, but with wearing masks themselves. And we are doing it specifically because of safety reasons right now. We are doing it because we have to. Restating the complaint in your own words shows active listening. So being able to, whether it's rephrase what it is that the guest is complaining about, or what they're stating, shows that you are initiating that dialogue and you're not just reacting to what it is that the guest says, but it shows that you're kind of building this bridge together. And then the last one right here is about letting the guest be right, even if they're wrong. And this is one of the things that sometimes sounds like the most counterintuitive, especially if the guest is challenging a safety-related policy, because as we know, the customer is not always right. But if we take this approach right here in the first step, the listen step, that maybe the guest is right to the extent that they are upset about needing to comply with the policy, then what that does is it paves the way for the rest of the dialogue and the rest of the conversation to happen and to be productive. And that, just like Matt said earlier, start the conversation, not a confrontation, that when you allow the guest to be right, at least just in their own mind, then it opens up the door to the conversation and minimizes the confrontation. So that's the listening component. Now, I'm putting a bonus step in right here. And this is something that after implementing the last model for several years, I found that there is something that can go after listen and before the rest of it that is very effective in de-escalating a wide variety of complaints. And that is thanking your guest for complaining. This is before doing anything else. This is before going into any type of resolution. Thanking your guest for complaining can be one of the most effective de-escalation techniques you can use. The reason why is because if the guest is upset, if the guest is venting, if the guest is angry, and you offer a sincere appreciation, you say, first and foremost, I want to thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. What it does is it really shows the guest that you're not there for the confrontation. You are there because, hey, I do want to work with you. Even if you hear the complaint several times a day, several times a week, all day, every day, whatever it is, acting like it is the first time that it is being brought up allows that guest to feel that they are being very productive. And you are giving them that opportunity and saying, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention, even if you were already aware of it. This is one thing that I found that when working in guest services and guest communications, if a letter would come across my desk or a phone call would come in of a guest who is so angry, who is, so hot that they are practically on fire with rage, of saying, hey, first of all, I just want to thank you so much for writing in, for calling in, for approaching me, for bringing it to my, whatever it is. And oftentimes, this can be applied to several other types of complaint resolution as well. So for instance, a lot of guests who might be upset about a policy, whether it's masks, maybe they won't complain about it. But as a result, now you've got a guest who's leaving dissatisfied, who didn't complain. And so there wasn't that opportunity to be able to have that conversation. So showing them that you appreciate them bringing this up to you so you can have that conversation really tears down this wall and starts to form that bridge that you're able to work together. So that's listen, thanking, and then we're back into the regular acronym right here with apologizing. And I like to say there is a right way and a wrong way to apologize for any type of service failure or any type of complaint resolution. And it first starts with expressing regret for what is occurring. And this has to do with the empathy component of the complaint resolution, of showing the guest that you care, showing the guest that you're concerned, even if it is perhaps about something that they are not complying with, being able to at least have that dialogue. And I like to say you should apologize for the effect rather than apologizing for the cause. So I'll give you an example. For instance, if you were to say to a guest, I am so sorry that we are infringing on your rights to freedom of speech, that's the cause, at least in the guest's mind, why they might be complaining, why they might be escalating the situation. But it's not necessarily the most productive statement to make, because it kind of takes on that load of saying, yeah, we have this policy and yeah, it is infringing on your rights, which we all know it's not. I was Googling earlier why people think that and saying, well, it has to do with freedom of speech and being blocked. And obviously, instead of telling the guest that you're not infringing on their rights, of course, is not going to appease them as well, because they're not just going to say, oh, okay, didn't think of it that way. But apologizing for the effect would be when you say, I'm so sorry that you might not be enjoying your day visiting us as you expected. I apologize that you may not be as comfortable in our park as you expected. I'm sorry if you feel that the policy is making you uncomfortable. If you notice that, it goes over to the guest and it talks about what it is that they're bringing up and about how they feel, not apologizing for the complaint itself, or not apologizing for the policy itself. And that's one thing that is really important and something that can happen very unintentionally, very often, specifically if you use the word unfortunately. And that is a word that I always talk about when it comes to complaint resolution, to take the word unfortunately completely out of your vocabulary, especially when looking at de-escalating guest situations. So for instance, if you were to say, you must wear a mask, unfortunately, it's our policy for your safety, you're basically saying right there, that you are apologizing for the policy. Or I would let you not wear a mask if I was able to, but I can't, so I'm not going to. Something like this I always talk about when if the guest is complaining and they want a refund and you say, oh, I'm sorry you had a bad experience, but unfortunately our tickets are non-refundable. Well, that's really not unfortunate, and neither are these policies that are in place for keeping guests safe. So taking a note of just that one specific word, the word unfortunately, really takes the conversation in a different direction than you intended to, and it comes across to the guest as well that you might be apologizing for the policy. It can sound like you are disconnecting yourself from the organization, especially if you say unfortunately, this policy is in place. Kind of sounds like you're not really owning that policy and that enforcement, and being able to communicate that this is specifically for your safety, for our safety, for the safety of all guests and team members. And so now we go on to the solve component. And this is where it gets a little interesting, because this is not a typical type of service failure. So this is really where some certain modifications need to be put in place. But I'll tell you something that I always talk about when it comes to the actual resolution component of service failures, and that is the always give them something mentality. Now, you might be looking at this just like when I said, let them be right, even if they're wrong, that if say always give them something, well, this just means that we are giving them refunds, or we are, letting them take their mask off or something like that. But the always give them something just shows that you have the intention to make them satisfied. And oftentimes information can be that something, can be that adequate solution. Matt put it very well earlier when he talked about the smoking sections, within the park, and starting it off with that conversation, not the confrontation, and being able to say, hey, here is what you can do. So with that smoking example, the alternative is saying, hey, just, you can't smoke here, or, please put your cigarette out. So the equivalent of this would be like, hey, you need to put your mask back on. Otherwise, the alternative would be and we know that a lot of attractions are implementing small mask-free zones that you can briefly go in and enjoy a few minutes of fresh air without a mask, and physically distant from other guests in your party. If you have that, then it's almost the identical approach to the smoking situation of just saying, hey, just letting you know, I notice you have your mask down. You are more than welcome to do that in our mask-free area, or if you wanted to, if you're, an FEC, to say, hey, if you want to leave the building, go out in your car, have a few minutes to yourself outside the facility, away from other guests and team members, you're more than welcome to do that. And presenting it in that positive light that you are here to provide them with information, not just to enforce a policy. Because the important thing to think about here is that the end goal is both the agreement with it and the compliance with it. So if, let's say, you see a guest in passing and you say, hey, remember to put your mask up, and the guest does it, and you walk out of sight and they immediately pull their mask back down, then they complied for the time frame that you were there, that you were visibly seeing them violating the policy. But we want to make sure that they actually agree with why it's in place as well, and making sure to communicate to say, hey, and even tying it in with, yeah, we know it might be uncomfortable. We know it's really hot outside. We know that that it can be maybe a little more difficult to enjoy your day, especially as it was, or compared to how it was last year. And we're doing this for the safety of our guests and team members, because we want to make sure that we can continue providing an enjoyable experience throughout this difficult time for everybody, and making sure that that everyone is on the same team here of complying with the policy that's been put in place. So the end goal is very much, about agreement with why they should be wearing a mask, or why they should be complying to the policy, not just the compliance itself that could be very limited. That could be the duration of the time that you are together. And then we go here again, and it's another thank step of this process. And I think this actually ties in very nicely with what Matt said earlier, that thanking people really brings a lot of fulfillment and a lot of value from that standpoint. So it is probably no coincidence that it's actually in here twice. Now, at the beginning, we were thanking our guests for complaining. We were thanking them for giving the opportunity to have the dialogue and have the conversation. Now, assuming everything has gone well throughout this entire process, we're now thanking them again as a follow-through. Now we're thanking them retroactively for giving the opportunity to be able to come to that agreeable solution, so that they know that they can either go to the mask-free area, or go, out to their car if they needed to, a 15-minute break from wearing a mask where they're away from any other guests and team members. And I like to say that this is the follow-through, because this is just as important as any of the other steps in the process. Because if this is not executed correctly, then it can have the possibility of backfiring. And I'll just give you a quick example. Several years ago, I was flying, and the airline lost my luggage, and they got it to me over 24 hours later, and they damaged my suitcase. So the entire time I was I was traveling. I'm on the phone with the airline trying to find some sort of resolution. Came to the point they were going to give me, $50 in cash to purchase another suitcase. I was international, so they said, yeah, we'll give it to you in U.S. currency. I got to the airport to go home, and he gives it to me in the local country's currency, which would cause me to go exchange it. And, I would lose a huge portion, a huge percentage of the amount. And it just took so much back and forth to get it to the point where, he would compensate me in US dollars, give me the adequate compensation that the airline agreed to. And I thanked him. I went through this process on the end of the customer. I said, hey, I just want to thank you so much for working with me and for helping me come to this agreeable solution. I am very appreciative of your support. I said that as a customer. He turned around and he said, yeah, I bet you are. And at that point, it completely, I still had the $50 cash. I was still able to apply it towards, purchasing new luggage, but it completely unraveled the hospitality component of this dialogue that we had, that I was at a point where I could have been the most satisfied customer and would have gone and booked a new flight immediately with that airline. It's been over 6 years and I've had, no interest in flying that airline again. So thanking them for working with you and kind of tying off that service recovery or that complaint resolution process by expressing that appreciation. And then as you're done, as you're capping it all off, offer opportunity for additional assistance to say, hey, I'm so thankful that we were able to have this conversation. Thank you so much for wearing your mask. And by the way, if there is anything else that I can do for you, if you need help with anything else while you're visiting us today, my name's Josh. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me, to ask for me. You can find me here, whatever it is, just saying, hey, is there anything else we can do? Do you need help? Finding directions to another attraction or anything that you can do to continue the conversation going with that positive light, to show that you are there for additional assistance. You're not just there for the de-escalation component. You're there because you genuinely want to work with them to see that they have a good experience while complying with all of the rules that are put in place for the safety of guests and team members. So that's the last, or I would say the LTAST model, as I like to call it. So listen, thank, apologize, solve, and thank. This can be applied to a wide variety of service failure situations, really anything from very small, from dropping popcorn up to large situations like we're dealing with today. So with that in mind, we want to thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be able to share this webinar today. If you have any feedback for us, please let us know. I know Matt gave the Attraction Pros email address a little bit earlier. It's pretty easy. It is attractionpros@gmail.com. If there is anything else that you want to see, if there are any other additional topics that you want for us to cover, or to be able to reach out to other industry professionals to provide interviews. If you listen to the podcast, we publish a new interview almost every single week. Please let us know. We are always open for that feedback.
And Josh, I just want to thank you for putting this together. This was kind of one of your great ideas to do this webinar, so I appreciate that. And for anybody who is obviously listening and maybe watching the replay, I hope that you really enjoyed this information. And again, I'll speak for Josh, Scott, and I. We are all here to help. And if there's anything that we can provide in terms of additional resources, please feel free to let us know. And Josh, I think we have one more screen to share.
We do.
There we go. Yes. So this is how you can get in touch with us. There's Scott, myself, and Josh. And for everybody out there watching and listening, we are all Attraction Pros.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody, have a great day. Once again, please feel free to reach out to anyone or all of us with any questions, comments, concerns, complaints. We're happy to take all of it. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Attraction Pros podcast.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to drop us a line on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, and make sure to follow us on all the social channels.
And make sure you've subscribed to the show so you can get the latest episodes every single week. Also, if you're new to the show, be sure to check out all the great episodes and guests we've featured in the past.
And if you want to learn more about Matt and Josh and check out the best articles for you to operate your attraction most successfully, be sure to visit us at attractionpros.com.